Good morning and welcome to Coffee and Conversation with Gurpreet Bhatia, Principal Director for Cybersecurity and Deputy CISO, DoD. Please welcome Bishop Garrison, Vice President for Policy at INSA.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us after this long Veterans Day weekend. We're excited that one of our community's top leaders will be joining us again to speak about cybersecurity as a part of our three-part series focused on the IC's innovation ecosystem, sponsored by Salesforce. Now, as always, just a few housekeeping notes. If you have questions, and we truly hope that you do, please submit them through the question box on the right side of your screen. I will do my absolute best to get to all of your questions. We often have a lot of them, so we'll do our best to push through them. We also like to welcome members of the press. For everyone, please remember this program is on the record and it's being recorded. And finally, a big thank you to Salesforce, our sponsor for today's event, for their continued support of this series. We could not bring you this type of thought leadership without great companies like them. And now with that said, I'm pleased to introduce Bill Peston, the Senior Vice President for U.S. National Security, Defense, and Aerospace at Salesforce, to introduce our guest speaker. Bill, over to you.
Thank you, Bishop, and thank you to INSA for hosting this morning's discussion. And as you just stated, a happy belated Veterans Day to all the veterans that are out there. At Salesforce National Security, a wholly owned subsidiary of Salesforce, we have dedicated to the national security customers by empowering them to meet their mission requirements through cutting-edge commercial PaaS and SaaS enterprise solutions designed to meet the unique requirements of national security. We're also excited to share that Salesforce has achieved top secret authorization for the US government for intelligence use cases with Government Cloud Premium. National security organizations can now increase IT flexibility, enhance productivity, and safeguard sensitive data wherever the mission demands, from unclassified to classified needs. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Gurpreet Bhatia, who serves as the Department of Defense's Principal Deputy for Cybersecurity and Deputy Chief Information Security Officer. In this role, he leads the department's cybersecurity program, overseeing the coordination of cybersecurity standards, policies, and procedures with key stakeholders. Previously, Mr. Bhatia was Chief of Partner Engagements and Foreign Engagements at the NSA, where he was responsible for the day-to-day management of their foreign cryptologic partnerships, including technical guidance, management, and implementation of cryptologic foreign partner strategies, and representing NSA positions to foreign partners. Please join me in welcoming Gurpreet Bhatia.
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. I think we're having a little bit of a problem. We don't quite see you yet, but I think we'll be able to bring that back here any second now. But we hear you loud and clear.
Okay. I think we're working on getting me online.
No,
hopefully
you
can see me now.
Fantastic.
Okay,
fantastic.
Great.
You go, Mr. Bhatia.
Well, thank you for having me and for the kind words, and really look forward to having a meaningful conversation about cybersecurity today. As we look at it from the department's perspective, we have many challenges in cybersecurity which continue to evolve as our adversaries continue to evolve. And again, look forward to having a very holistic conversation about all things that the Department of Defense is focused on, and how we want to make sure that we have strong partnerships in industry and academia and our allies.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you again, Mr. Bhatia, for being here. We know with so much going on in the world and for the department, your time is incredibly important and valuable, and we want to make sure we make the best of it. So following up just on your opening remarks there, can you talk to us about some of those key challenges and priorities that you're hoping to address over the next few years?
Sure. So I think there's never a shortage of cybersecurity efforts that we want to focus on.
Yeah.
I want to highlight a few that we are really focused on from the Department of Defense. Right. I think these are probably not a surprise to most people that have been following anything that the Department of Defense is focused on from a cybersecurity perspective. The first thing I talk about is really big overarching efforts, right? So first, we're focused on making sure that we have zero trust enabled, and we have a mandate to make sure that we are zero trust enabled at the target level, which if you don't know what that means, you can go on our website. We have 2 levels within zero trust. So we want to get there by FY27. So fiscal year 27 is our goal to make sure that we have the department's enterprise infrastructure, IT infrastructure on zero trust network, right? So I think that is certainly our one of our highest priorities, and that really goes to the fundamental point of that we are assuming at this point that our adversaries are in our network. So how do you ensure you're getting away from the traditional perimeter defense and really focused on making sure that you are able to have visibility and peer into your own environment and make sure that the adversaries are not able to maneuver freely within your infrastructure and have access and exfil your data at will. So that is really a big part of how we're getting after that. And it's not just a technological evolution. It's really about making sure that we change our culture around how we speak about cybersecurity. So this has to do with training, accountability, making sure that we're making smart decisions on the net, we're granting right accesses to the right people for the right data when they need it. So that's really sort of the big holistic underarching or overarching umbrella that we are thinking through. Other efforts that we're embarking on is really making sure that now that our ecosystem is extending out to our defense industrial base, and as we deal with our allies and partners globally, we want to make sure that our ecosystem holistically is sound and trustworthy so we can share at speed with partners as we need to make sure that we have appropriate defensive measures deployed and strong cybersecurity posture. The other things we're focused on really are ensuring that the DIB cybersecurity, which we'll see a rule that is about to go into effect, which is the CMMC, which will go into effect later this year. That is really a way for us to have the assurance that we are all implementing and adhering to the same level of structure and rigor around cybersecurity. Other things we're focused on obviously are around AI to make sure that we are deploying that smartly and thoughtfully, and some of the foundational capabilities. So I think the foundational things that I think about really at a broad scale across the department are things like ICAM. How do we make sure that we are also focused on crypto modernization, which is really getting after the post-quantum and quantum readiness problem? So those are sort of some of the major efforts, but within those nested, really it's again, that cultural shift of making sure that we can have visibility across our entire enterprise. How do we have trained and tooled cyber defenders at all levels and all layers who can effectively and quickly get after things? So we, if you really look at the NIST cybersecurity framework, for instance, one of the things we tend to do is we respond a lot, but how do you shift that to the left to be able to proactively get after things? So when you're responding and recovering, you understand how to respond effectively and how to recover rather quickly from any incidents, because those are going to happen. So we're not aiming for a state where cybersecurity squashes all nefarious activity or all adversary activities, but our goal is really to minimize that impact, understand real time how that is happening, and how do you respond quickly to protect our vital national security information that resides on those infrastructure. I think the other things we want to think about really are, again, that workforce piece of this, which is really having trained personnel. And I think it's not just the trained personnel that manage our IT infrastructure or do cybersecurity, but how do you have acquisition folks that are trained and understand the implications of procurement of cybersecurity capabilities writ large? How do you ensure that across the board we have good insider threat programs? And again, that list is long and can be arduous, but really systematically working through that. And a lot of that falls under the zero trust umbrella. That's not to say that our perimeter defenses go away, but it's a complementary effort that allows you to have strong perimeter defense along with the zero trust controls and architecture that allows you that seamless end-to-end visibility and control over your information and your infrastructure.
Yeah, fantastic. You've made some absolutely salient points here. One, I'd like to note, as you talked about cyber acquisition, we at INSA, we're actually have heard that from industry and from other government officials as well. January 28th, we're having a cyber acquisition panel, a breakfast, to dive more deeply into topics just like that, based off of what experts like yourself are bringing to our attention. So if it's okay, I want to go back and pull the thread a little bit more on the zero trust piece of this. So as the Pentagon is continuing to push forward with the zero trust initiative, particularly on the high side, when you talk about JWICs and in the system, the top secret systems involved, how do you ensure that the security protocols, some of the technical aspects of this, can adapt across different cloud providers while maintaining this unified defense posture that you're kind of discussing here, because you have DoD's multiple domains and command and control efforts? Like, how do you ensure that you're going to have that type of unified posture?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I want to step back just for 1 second, right, as we get into sort of the zero trust across the board, right? I think it will demand that we shift our thinking and how we think about our assets on the wire, right? So it's really a space where understanding your inventory, including your devices, your data, your people, your software, right? Those are all really critical underlying things that we have to do foundationally to make sure that we can build on those components to do all the things we need to do, right? So without understanding the value of your data that you're trying to protect and share for different mission purposes, that's really hard to say I'm going to only grant access to the right people at the right time. Yeah. So we want to make sure those foundational components are done across the board as we start to think about that. And when we talk about multi-domain and multi-cloud environments, right? I think we're starting to sort of think through that a little bit harder, right? That's a tough problem. So the goal from JWCC was to allow that agility and flexibility to have multi-vendors that can provide that capability for the department across all of the domains. So when we focus on our unclassified and our classified domains, right, we want to make sure there is a reasonable amount of parity across those as we start to protect those ecosystem and environment. In terms of getting to how do you make sure that you have a good approach and you think through the protocols, I think some of that we're still kind of working through in terms of what are the specifics. Right now, we're focused more on making sure that you are meeting the mark on preventing adversaries from getting in as you look at zero trust, right? So when we get a cloud environment, for instance, you are procuring a compute environment that allows you to bring in some basic set of services, but there are still an incredible amount of applications and data and users that are porting over. So I think as we think about how does that persist, not just in a single environment, but how does that communicate across? So if you can imagine looking at even just broadly saying, hey, we have a specific cloud vendor that we use for one service or a department, and how do they communicate and share that across another department who may be using a different cloud vendor. I think we're working through that. I think some of the critical components that we traditionally think about are things like cross-domain solutions. We need hardened cross-domain solutions that are implemented smartly. We also think about how do you have confidentiality across as you communicate across those clouds. Sharing of real-time information, right? So as we start to look at monitoring and making sure there's consistency of monitoring and what you're able to see in terms of the visibility across those environments really is going to be critical. And then really thinking about how do the interactions play between those multi-domains, right? So I, as a user, may need to provide an assertion to another another domain to say, hey, I need access to a certain amount of data or certain types of data. Having that federation done, right? That's one of the things we're looking through now is how do you have federation, which means that you're going to have some normalization and baseline things. So you're going to normalize your data, for instance. You're going to normalize and federate identities, maybe another one. You're going to then make sure that there's interoperability. And I think this is where the vendors really are starting to lean in on some of this work is how do you have integration and interoperability across clouds and services, right? I think if you have a vendor A and a vendor B who implement different protocols and services and how even logging and event data may be rolled up, how do you then equate those two? And I, as a department, may want to see a single integrated picture of what you're able to see from your events across the board. So how do you start to then normalize those conversations and roll them up? So I think we're working through some of that. I think we're now still focused very much on making sure that we're implementing and securing individual environments and then starting to interconnect and look at how do the interactions between those environments play out. And I think one of the things that we always forget in doing all these really is about how do you do cybersecurity and defense, right? So we need to make sure that those are holistically integrated well together and they play, right? Because even when we do zero trust assessments, for instance, we're not looking at just red teaming to see if the adversary can get in, but it's the ability to detect and respond to that activity rather quickly. So I think we're again working through a lot of that minutia in terms of the individual activities and protocols and services that we really need to align on. But that's where we really need industry to come sort of work through how do you aggregate some of this information? How do you allow the seamless interoperability of multi-clouds to really and multi-domain environments to really persist? So that's kind of where we are in a nutshell for now.
Yeah, fantastic. Just the way you laid all of that out, I want to go back to kind of an overarching question that I jumped over a little bit because I wanted to hit the zero trust piece of it. But in your nearly 30-year career now between the Department of Defense and the private sector and private industry, just how does that inform your overall approach to this? Because I think you laid out a lot of different pieces about public-private partnerships and how it's going to be a part of businesses to help us come together on this unified structure when it comes to cybersecurity, particularly at cloud initiatives. How do you leverage your own skill set in order to really bring this whole picture together?
Sure. So let me just outline a couple of core principles that I think we all need to be mindful of. One, cybersecurity is a forever game, right? It doesn't stop. It continually evolves, and this is something where we need to continually make sure that we're upskilling, we're continually able to understand the complexity and the nuances. The second point is that this is not a environment or a effort that happens just because the Department of Defense does it. This is a completely team effort, right? So we need academia, we need industry leaders, we need thought leaders from across the board, from policy and other arenas as well. But we also need our allies, right? So this is a holistic global game that we really need to make sure that like-minded sort of cybersecurity professionals and cyber defense professionals are coming together to make sure that that we're successful at this, right? And I think that's really our superpower. I think is that power of partnerships is really where we need to lean in on. So one of the reasons I say that is because simple thing like capturing innovation. Right. I think we want to make sure that we're innovative in the department, and we want to make sure that we are leading forward in capturing all of the latest and greatest capabilities that the industry has to offer or academia has to offer, where we're able to capitalize on that. But what we need assistance with is really that integration of those capabilities, right? So it's really hard for us to consume very, very small innovative capabilities and start to integrate them. What we want is really that partnership to say, I'm going to be able to, based on your need and requirements, going to be able to deliver an integrated set of solutions and capabilities that you can quickly adapt and flex with, right? And that allows that agility to really persist. I think the other thing we really need to be mindful of is that we in the Department of Defense have a lot of legacy infrastructure, a lot of specialized things like weapon systems and critical infrastructure, which we don't own necessarily all of, and then the traditional IT environment. So I think we have a mixture of these environments that demand really, really specialized skill sets to make sure that we're achieving some level of parity as we talk about cybersecurity controls or visibility or monitoring, to be able to look at our threat intelligence and go, hey, we're able to counter those threats in a reasonable way. And at the end of the day, right, this is all about risk management.
Yeah.
So how do we ensure that we're buying down the appropriate risk in a timely way, but not impeding mission to be from being executed? So I think those are some of the things that we talk about, right? So I think that sometimes we miss the integration and interoperability perspective. That's really important, that we really start to think about integrated set of solutions. And I think industry is doing a great job of being able to provide solutions now that are more integrated, that are more interoperable, and really in a state where they're able to get to that state and reaching that state of plug and play of new evolutionary modules as we start to think about these flexible architectures going forward. So Zero Trust is a great example, right? So if tomorrow I have a better modernized ICAM solution, how can I quickly adapt that and integrate that into my ecosystem without disrupting and re-architecting everything in my environment?
Yeah, and that's a fantastic point on both accounts, particularly as we're talking about the emerging technology pieces, and we'll come back to the industry side of this in a second. But just in terms of emerging technologies, you've already mentioned kind of quantum computing and the future of crypto. We've talked a little bit about machine learning, about AI. How do you see those playing a role in enhancing the cybersecurity across domains? In multiple domain operations, kind of what you've already alluded to, like especially when we're talking about, as I think you've hit on a couple of times now, detecting and responding to complex attacks and to complex threats. Because a part of this, as you mentioned, is risk assessment. And anytime you're adding these new emerging technologies, into these systems, you're potentially increasing risk. But that doesn't mean it can't be properly mitigated. So how do you look at these emerging technologies enhancing domains in order to detect some of these types of threats?
Yeah, I think when we look at emerging technologies, right, there's probably multiple solutions dropped every single day that really are looking at how do we manage specific threat streams across the board, right? I think when we look at emerging technologies, right, our goal is to make sure that we are one, evaluating them against our architecture, and then second, how do we make sure that we're able to integrate them to deliver the outcome that we want at the end of the day, right? So emerging technologies, I think AI is a great example of that, is sort of still an emerging technology for us, even though it's been around for a little while now, right? So I think we're evolving from how do you think about this challenge of big data, right, and then start to apply automation, and we're moving from the assertion and the computation challenge of how do you look at large data, compute, ask the right questions of it, but now how do you start to automate some of those things and really help with broader questions that we think about. So as we think about AI, for instance, we start to think about how do you help it solve cybersecurity challenges, right? So malware analysis at scale and speed. When we're responding to incidents, how do you assert some kind of what is the damage assessment as we look at any incident, and how do you then effectively plan to respond from those and recover from those incidents? I think there are many emerging technologies like that are going to help, but each emerging technology also comes with its own challenges. So how do you, for instance, in AI, remove biases from language models? How do you train them effectively and appropriately? And how do you assess them to allow the user interactions to happen and that learning to continue to grow and evolve over time. So I think we're trying to lean in as hard as we can on emerging technologies, but we also want to be in a state where we have a level of confidence as we start to deploy them across the board within our enterprise. And again, our enterprise is not just at the Pentagon. We're a global enterprise where we start to think about how do you do this at the pointy end of the spear in disconnected environments. How do you do this to bring your critical infrastructure and dependencies in a state where you can have that trust to make sure that you are able to protect your critical infrastructure that supports your mission at the end of the day. So that's kind of where we are in emerging technologies. I think one of the things that we have tried to do is really look at how do elements like DIU really help us capture that innovation. So how does DIU then really tap into that brain trust and bring some operational relevance to the capabilities that are being delivered every day in industry, and how do you take those best lessons learned and say, hey, this is a more effective way to do it. But as we look at how do you deploy those technologies, again, we want to look at how do you evolve our processes, our methodologies for assessing those and integrating those, right? Because each one of those will carry some risk as an opportunity with them as well. So we want to make sure that there's a balance there. Certainly a place where we look to do better over the future.
Yeah, interesting you say that. And as I mentioned, we're going to do some audience questions here as we go. And I want to jump to one because it's really germane to this part of the conversation. It comes from Derek Claiborne asking, well, how is DoD utilizing AI and machine learning to process and analyze the department's unique data at scale? I think the particular part of that being at scale is an interesting thought.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I'll just go back again to start with the big data platform problem, right? So if we look at how do we look at that large amount of data and create maps that allow you to answer questions quickly, right? In the same vein, we are starting to pilot a series of AI systems that allow you to look at that data and create dashboards, right? I think one of the ones we have in place is really a decision dashboard called Advana that we are.
Remember Advana well from my days at DoD. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're looking at how do you effectively feed the right data into that, right? And I think again that goes back to how do you make sure that you trust your data, one, and then feeding that into a decision loop. So I think we are starting to look at those kind of pilots to make sure that we can look through our data to provide decision makers, not just in the Pentagon, but out in the field, right, the information that they need to carry out and execute their missions. And I think that is just one of the places we're starting to do that. I think we also, again, are starting to look at how do you make sure, from an AI perspective, right? The two things that I think about are, one is the safety of AI and one is the security, from a security perspective, right? So I think that's where we're starting to put rigor around making sure that we are thinking through the components of what it takes to have AI systems at scale that allow you to get not just decision makers, but automate some of the functions that you really want to automate, right? So I don't, just like any cyber space operations, right? We don't anticipate sort of completely going hands off on critical decisions, but this is really an enabling technology that allows you to support decision makers, but it allows you to also do simple functions like, can I on the wire just check to make sure my annual cybersecurity training was taken by everybody, or how do I make sure that I understand my patching landscape across my ecosystem? Right. So I think there are very, very immediate impacts that we can have from this capability, all the way to making really, really sophisticated decisions from the data streams that we're starting to gather and collect and collate in tools like Advana.
Yeah, and I think this all kind of is intertwined to a lot of what you've talked about in terms of a unified theory of all of it, because at the end of the day, you have to have clean data you can trust, that's properly tagged, that is feeding into a system that can help enhance the decision-making process particularly through these dashboards that are necessary to, be able to make sense of the data in a way that's really going to be impactful with leadership. So as a part of that, and again, all of this goes back to kind of how we're engaging with industry to have these conversations about what the needs of government are. So can you talk to us about how you developed strong partnerships across industry, but also, as you mentioned, like with DIU and other similar innovation units internally, but also with academia and with our allies in order to give kind of this more broad, unified picture?
Sure. Let me start with our allies, right? I mean, I think, again, this is a global ecosystem now, and we need our allies to really be in a space where we are both able to confidently share and seamlessly share information and conduct missions globally as we need to. So I think that is a space where we are continually and actively working with our allies to make sure they understand where our roadmap is leading and how they can also take our best lessons learned. So we, conduct a series of pilots. We have invested a lot in putting our implementation plans and strategies together. We've actually, on Zero Trust, for instance, we've also gone through and Navy being a gold star on blank speed, achieving advanced Zero Trust, right? So we want to take all of those best practices and lessons learned and make sure that we're sharing with our allies to make sure they understand our journey and what it took to get here and what it'll take to continue to evolve in this space. So we are constantly working with them to make sure they understand not just a very static sharing of threat intel or threat information, but they understand how to evolve and again, that cultural change evolution that needs to arise, not just from a technology perspective, but also from an operational security perspective, also from a flexibility and agility for data decision, for understanding how to really protect, share information that is sensitive. So I think we're sharing lessons learned, but we're also not just sharing our lessons learned, but we're also listening to them, right? They have some really, really interesting ideas and great ideas that they're leaning on their industry to bring forward. So it's a two-way exchange in terms of how do we uplift our collective ecosystem. So we're certainly in a constant conversation with them to make sure that we can help establish and maintain that level of trust to be able to share information and share resources as we need over time. With industry, right, there are multiple streams of that. And again, I go back to Zero Trust in terms of the series of pilots we're conducting with industry, not just with the 4 vendors that we have under JWCC contract, but we're also exploring how do you bring other innovative solutions to the table. So looking at how do you do on-prem clouds. So we're looking at how do you assess that capability, establishing labs and working with other labs that are national labs to make sure that we can establish means for assessing those capabilities. Again, our job isn't always necessarily to be on the forefront and develop capabilities. Our job is to really be able to assess them out against our needs, and our job is to make sure we are sharing those requirements up front to say this is our expectation and our set of requirements that we want to do to conduct our mission. So we're working with multiple labs as well to make sure that we can establish ecosystems where folks can think about how do you demonstrate those capabilities and integrated capabilities, right? Be it an entire Zero Trust environment or small capabilities that help you plug and play into that environment. And again, I think some of that outreach is through our defense industrial base program that we have. So we want to make sure that we are continually keeping the drumbeat up with them. And part of that is sharing threat intel. Part of that is helping them understand what it means to be cyber secure. And one of the things that we always constantly are in conversation with our vendors is JWCC cloud vendors, for instance, are great examples of how can you help provide environments that are ready and meet the thresholds for CMMC, for instance. How do how do you provide that? And I call it the Stables easy button, right? So how do small and medium-sized companies really sort of get that assurance that they're going to be operating in a secure environment and able to protect the department's critical information that they're dealing with. So I think there is a whole lot of interaction happening between industry and the department at all levels. And it's not just at the OSD level, but all the services and the departments and agencies are also reaching out and working with industry to establish these pilots to demonstrate capabilities that they need individually at their level. And again, the last thing I'll offer is, from the JFHQ DODIN side, for instance, how do you ensure that our cybersecurity measures enable DODIN to be defended by our defenders? So we're trying to make sure that we are looking at all fronts across the board. So that's kind of how we're working with allies and our industry partners.
I have to tell you, Mr. Bhatia, every time I have a question lined up that from the audience that I know I want to hit you with, you've already answered it in so many different ways. But one thread I do want to pull back on, when you kind of mentioned a little bit about small providers, some of the smaller businesses in this equation. Maria Berliner asked, does DoD evaluate and retain small providers of state-of-the-art data management and risk analysis? Like, how do you go about maintaining those relationships, those contracts with the smaller providers?
I don't know if I have a great answer to this one, but I think overall that really the responsibility is within the services and the departments and agencies to maintain that relationship from a retention perspective. I think what we want from a department, overarching department level, is really that every voice is heard, every idea is heard, and we are tapping into that engine to make sure that we're able to capture the right innovative solutions at the end of the day, right? And I think the view is that there are many problems to be solved. So I think every vendor is going to need to be at the table to make sure that we're meeting our mark from a department level goal. And I think there are many innovative small companies that are providing really rapidly interesting solutions that meet our goal. So encourage all of them to interact with the services and agencies and acquisition folks to make sure that they're bringing those ideas forward, right? And I think again we're trying to interact that with some of those companies through our DIB interactions that we have on a regular basis. We also lean on, again, DIU for a lot of those sort of companies to come through so they can filter that information appropriately for us and match against what the department's highest priorities are. So many avenues to come through for companies that are providing those solutions. And I hope they continue to be bold and really bring those bright ideas to the table.
No, fantastic. And just to kind of pivot off of that too, and another piece that you allude to a little bit here, but in your opinion, what are some of those most pressing technical and resource needs that are facing national security intelligence community as they relate to your work within cybersecurity? What are the biggest things you think you need?
Yeah, I think from a technical perspective, I think Zero Trust is probably the broadest thing I can say. I think within that, a couple of things I'll highlight, right? One is really ensuring that we have a modernized ICAM architecture, right? So really that space is really ripe with understanding how do you fundamentally ensure that you are verifying identities and allowing access for the users to the data that they need, right? So I think that is a big overarching goal in terms of how do we think about ICAM going forward. And we talk about ICAM because that is, we're in uncharted spaces to some extent, right? As we start to think about mobile, work from home, really disconnected environments that we want to allow and enable at the pointy end. So I think that is really a hard problem as we start to think about that. The second one is really how do you then take all these capabilities and enable them at the pointy end from a warfighter perspective, from a disconnected environment? How do you enable that small enterprise to persist when you are connected and really go disconnected at some point, right? How do you enable that same level of trust to be maintained? So I think that is also a hard problem, right? So that some of that is just simple synchronization back to the enterprise, but some of that is really then the remote work that they have to do when they're disconnected. The third one is really about how do you ensure our critical infrastructure is secure, right? That is an incredibly massive challenge that we face today in terms of how do you apply the right controls for protecting our control systems and our SCADA systems, and fundamentally even things like IoT and OT, right? So those are really hard problems because not everything we do at the enterprise is scalable in those environments and ecosystems. So how do you really then determine what are the right zero trust controls in an integrated way that you need to apply to protect your critical infrastructure? I think those are probably large challenges that we think about. And then again, at the end of the day, this is really about making sure that we're all uplifting all of those things together, right? So making sure that every company is thinking through their responsibility and accountability on how do you apply the right controls to protect sensitive information. We need to make sure that we are applying those that rigor to our weapon systems, critical infrastructure, to our enterprise IT, and then across the board accountability for things that happen on the wire, right? So as we look at things that are challenging for us, there are things like how do you have management over insider threats? How do you control that? How do you prevent insider threats from happening? How do you then also have assurance in the software that you're deploying across the board, right? And that goes to not just good software development practices from DevSecOps, but also how are you managing the supply chain challenges that you face from a supply chain perspective for software, for hardware, and having XBOMs for just about everything that you consume, right? As we start to, again, do all those things and match all those things, we want to be at the speed of the adversary, or actually be ahead of the speed of the adversary. So I think some of this is really holistically shifting our mindset to think broadly and across the board. Cybersecurity really is a broad problem beyond technology. So I hope people are focusing on governing, risk management, training, policies that enable defense, active defense of your environments and your data. And really, fundamentally, none of the things have changed, right? So we've always known that you need to understand your data landscape. You always need to understand what your device landscape is. You need to make sure simple things like when people leave or enter, they have appropriate account management. So I think a lot of those foundational things, from patching, encryption, and looking at how do you make sure that you are following all the best practices, I think those are all still in play, and now it's just sort of culminating under a single umbrella.
Absolutely. And this has just been incredibly enlightening, particularly as you laid out just a unified theory for a lot of cybersecurity as it relates not only to the national security apparatus, but more importantly to us, to the IC more specifically. So with that, we're coming up against time, Mr. Bhatia. I just want to ask you for any final thoughts. What's the one takeaway that you would love for our audience to have moving forward with their morning today?
Sure. I would say I just want to reiterate that, one, cybersecurity is a long game. This is not a one and done. So zero trust isn't the answer and it stops and when we achieve zero trust, right? This is a continual effort. So everything has to be continuous. And I think, again, our secret superpower is really in that power of partnerships, that we really need to make sure that that partnership is strong. It allows us to have a two-way constructive conversation about the brightest ideas, the boldest ideas, and how do we bring together cybersecurity communities across the board to solve really, really hard problems that we face today. So that's what I want to leave the audience with.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again so much. This has just been a tremendous time just listening to you, hearing your thoughts, and thank you for your leadership in that space. We know how difficult answering a lot of these complex challenges can be, creating solutions to them. So we were very thankful to hear directly from you this morning.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me this morning.
Thank you. And thank all of you for joining us this morning and for listening to this insight. Thank you again to Salesforce for being such a terrific sponsor of this series. And for everyone joining, thank you for being part of the program. When the webinar ends, a short survey will pop up. Please, please, please take a moment to complete it and let us know how you think we did. We really, truly use this data for our own internal processes to make our coffee and conversations as enlightening as possible for you folks. On Thursday, looking ahead, on Thursday, we will hold a final leadership dinner of the calendar year for DIA Director Jeffrey Cruz from 5:30 to 9:30 p.m. at the Hilton McLean Tyson's Corner. Please check out our website about that. We will be discussing strategic competition, JWICS, IT modernization, space-based threats, emerging technology, and much, much more. On November 20th, the INSA Foundation, INSA, and the National Security Neurodiversity Network will hold a virtual event focused on universal design in the IC workplace, exploring how these principles can be applied across all sectors of the IC to support neurodiverse employees and create a fully accessible workplace. We will then wrap up our in-person programming for the year with our Common Thread Charlottesville program, showcasing the innovation and growth taking place in this vibrant national security hub. Plus, there will be a job fair and opening and closing receptions. We don't want you folks to miss any of this. Finally, to close out the year, join us for two more coffee and conversations, one with NSA Director of Operations, Natalie Lang, on December 10th, and then with State Department's INR CIO, Jimmy Hall Jr. on December 19th. Please learn more about all of these programs at insaonline.org. And this concludes today's program. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.